The great chamber of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet during a human speech. Ambassador Jake Morrison stood at the podium where humans had spoken for 300 years, but today felt different. His voice carried across the vast hall to representatives of 47 alien species, each sitting in their specially designed sections that accommodated their unique biology. Jake looked out at the familiar faces that had become part of his daily life. The crystalline Vorthic delegates sparkled under the chamber lights, their gem-like bodies refracting rainbow patterns across the walls. The massive Krellian representatives sat in their reinforced chairs, their thick armor plates gleaming. The floating gas beings of the ethereal collective hovered in their containment fields, while the plant-like Verdani swayed gently in their soil-filled platforms. Honored members of the Galactic Council, Jake began, his words translated instantly into dozens of languages and communication methods. After careful consideration, the United Terran Federation formally announces our withdrawal from Council space. All human colonies, research stations, and diplomatic missions will be evacuated within the next 6 months. A chamber erupted in surprised chatter. Council Chairman Vexmore, a tall reptilian being with golden scales, raised his clawed hand for silence, his large yellow eyes fixed on Jake with confusion rather than concern. Ambassador Morrison, Vexmore said in his deep, rumbling voice, surely this is a negotiating position. What are humanity's demands for remaining in the Council? Jake shook his head slowly. There are no demands, Chairman. No conditions for our return? This decision is final. He paused, letting his words sink in. We wish the Council continued prosperity and success. In the human residential district of Nexus Prime, Captain Lisa Hayes walked through empty apartments and offices. Moving crews worked quietly, packing 3 centuries of human presence into shipping containers. The efficiency was remarkable, but Lisa noticed something different about this evacuation compared to others she had overseen. There were no complaints, no last-minute negotiations, no tears. Her communication device buzzed. Captain Hayes, this is Transport 7. We finished loading the archive from the Cultural Center. Understood, Lisa replied. Proceed to the next pickup point. She watched through the window as another transport lifted off from the spaceport. The human evacuation fleet numbered over 2,000 ships, from massive colony transports to small personal vessels. Every human in Council space was leaving, from the newest settlers to families who had lived here for generations. A young woman named Amy Carter approached her. Amy had been born on Nexus Prime and had never seen Earth. Captain, where exactly are we going? Lisa smiled. Somewhere better, Amy. Somewhere we can build something new. Dr. Ryan Clark sealed the last of his research files in the xenobiology lab. 40 years of work studying alien diseases and developing cures sat in neat digital packages, ready for transfer to his alien colleagues. His research had saved millions of lives across dozens of species, preventing 3 major pandemics and developing treatments for countless rare conditions. His assistant, a spider-like being named ClickSpeaker, approached with obvious distress. Dr. Clark, surely you can continue your work through remote consultation. The galaxy needs your expertise. Ryan carefully removed his personal items from his desk. The files contain everything needed to continue the research. Your team is capable of excellent work. But the intuitive leaps, the creative connections you make between seemingly unrelated data, ClickSpeaker's translator made sad clicking sounds. How can we replace that? You'll find a way, Ryan said gently. You always have before we arrived, and you will after we leave. But ClickSpeaker knew this wasn't true. Before humans joined the Council, medical research had progressed slowly, with each species working in isolation. Ryan's ability to see patterns across species barriers had revolutionized galactic medicine. Now that knowledge was walking away. In the Council's diplomatic quarter, Ambassador Morrison finished his final meetings. The process was surprisingly simple. Humans had always been meticulous record keepers, and every treaty, agreement, and obligation was properly documented and concluded. No loose ends, no unfinished business. Ambassador Zephyr Class of the Vorthak approached him in the corridor. Her crystalline form chimed softly as she moved. Jake, in 3 centuries of council membership, I have never seen a species depart with such ... completeness. Usually there are demands, threats, emotional appeals. Why is humanity being so quiet about this? Jake stopped walking and turned to face her. Zephyr Class had been a friend for decades, one of the few council members who consistently supported human initiatives. Because we have nothing left to say, Zephyr. We've said it all before. But surely there's something we can do, some way to address your concerns. Our concerns were addressed the same way they always were, Jake replied. They were noted, filed, and forgotten. We're simply tired of repeating ourselves. The human military bases across council space emptied with the same quiet efficiency. General Susan Porter oversaw the withdrawal of human peacekeeping forces from a dozen conflict zones. Her troops had been mediating disputes and maintaining ceasefires across the galaxy, often in dangerous and thankless positions. Colonel Brad Young approached her as the last transport prepared to depart from the contested border between Krellian and hegemony space. General, the local commanders are asking if we'll maintain remote advisory support. Susan looked out at the alien forces on both sides of the border. Without human peacekeepers, these 2 species would likely resume their centuries-old conflict. Within months. No remote support, Colonel. They need to learn to solve their own problems. But ma'am, the casualties are not our responsibility anymore, Susan finished. We've given them 300 years of peace. That should be enough. Time to learn how to maintain it themselves. The last human research station in the Outer Rim systems shut down its operations. Dr. Paul Martinez had been studying quantum field effects in deep space, work that promised to revolutionize faster-than-light travel. His alien colleagues begged him to continue the research through remote collaboration. The data is all here, Paul explained as he powered down the quantum sensors. The patterns are clear once you know what to look for, but his colleagues knew the truth. Paul's breakthrough. Insights came from intuition as much as data. He could see connections that escaped purely logical analysis. Without him, the research would stagnate. On Nexus Prime, the last day of human presence arrived without ceremony. Admiral Beth Strong stood in the empty council chamber, looking at the section where human representatives had sat for 3 centuries. The chairs were clean, the desks cleared, the communication equipment properly disconnected. Council Chairman Vexmore entered the chamber, his golden scales reflecting the overhead lights. Admiral Strong, I confess I still don't understand this decision. Humans have been valued members of this council. Beth turned to face him. Valued, Chairman? In 300 years, how many human proposals were adopted without significant modification? How many times were our warnings heeded before disasters struck? How often were our contributions acknowledged rather than attributed to alien leadership? Vexmore's tail swished uncomfortably. There may have been oversights, but there were no oversights, Beth interrupted. There was a pattern. And we've, finally decided to stop enabling it. She walked toward the exit, then paused. The galaxy is vast, Chairman. There are many species out there who understand the value of genuine partnership. We're going to find them. The UES Liberty, humanity's last ship in council space, undocked from Nexus Prime exactly 6 months after Jake Morrison's announcement. Admiral Strong watched the capital world shrink behind them as they accelerated toward the edge of the system. The evacuation had been completed without a single incident, delay, or complaint. Every human facility had been properly shut down. Every piece of equipment either removed or donated to local authorities. The humans left behind functional infrastructure, detailed instruction manuals, and complete records of their work. What they didn't leave behind was themselves. As the Liberty jumped to faster-than-light speed, a strange silence settled over Council. Space. For the first time in 3 centuries, humanity's voice was absent from galactic affairs. The other species barely noticed at first, assuming the silence was temporary. They would learn otherwise soon enough. 6 months had passed since the last human transport disappeared into the void, and the Galactic Council was beginning to notice problems. Small things at first, delays and inefficiencies that seemed minor but grew more troublesome each day. Commander Thaxmore of the Krellian Empire stood in his war room, staring at reports from the border dispute with the hegemony of Taos. What should have been a simple, territorial negotiation had turned into a shouting match between his diplomats and theirs. Both sides were dug in, neither willing to compromise. "Where are the mediators?" Thaxmore demanded of his aide. "Sir, we sent requests to the Council diplomatic corps, but they say their current mediators are busy with other conflicts." Thaxmore's thick armor plates clicked together as he shifted in frustration. For 200 years, whenever the Krellians had border issues, human mediators would arrive within days. They understood both cultures, could find common ground, and usually had solutions that left everyone satisfied. Now his people faced months of bureaucratic delays while tensions escalated. "Get me a direct line to the hegemony commanders," he growled. "If the Council won't help us, we'll settle this ourselves." His aide looked worried. "Sir, direct negotiations without mediators have historically led to—" "I know what they've led to," Thaxmore cut him off. "But we don't have human mediators anymore. On the refugee world of Kepler 442b, the crisis was more immediate. The planet housed displaced populations from 3 different wars, nearly 2 million beings from a dozen species living in temporary shelters that had become permanent over the years. Administrator Zixkala, a tall insectoid being, stood in the empty warehouse that should have been full of medical supplies. The shipment from the Outer Rim colonies was 3 weeks late, and his attempts to track the delivery had led nowhere. "The shipping coordinator was human," explained his logistics officer, a nervous mammalian creature named Pipte. "Commander." Alex Turner maintained all the supply routes personally. Since the humans left, no one knows the full delivery schedule. Zixkala's compound eyes focused on the manifest pad. Turner's system had been incredibly complex, tracking hundreds of ships across dozens of trade routes, timing deliveries to arrive exactly when needed. It had seemed like magic how supplies always appeared just before they ran out. "Surely, Turner. Left instructions, databases, something we can follow?" Pipte shook his head sadly. "The data files are complete, but they're just numbers and schedules." Turner somehow knew which routes would have delays, which suppliers were reliable, which cargoes needed priority handling. He could see patterns we can't. In the medical sector, 3 children from different species were showing symptoms of malnutrition. Without proper supplies, Zixkala would have to choose which refugees got help first. It was a choice Turner had never forced him to make. The industrial world of Gamma Centauri faced different problems. Production manager Krelvox stood in his factory, watching alien technicians struggle with machinery that had worked perfectly for decades under human oversight. "The quantum fabricator is making defective components again," reported his assistant. "This is the 5th breakdown this month." Krelvox studied the readouts, but the technical data meant nothing to him. His species specialized in resource extraction, not manufacturing. The humans had brought industrial expertise that transformed Gamma Centauri from a mining world into a manufacturing center that supplied 17 different species. "Contact the equipment manufacturer," he ordered. "Sir, the manufacturer is 3 systems away. It will take weeks to get a technician here, and they charge enormous fees for emergency service." Before the human departure, Karen Wells would have diagnosed the problem in minutes and fixed it herself. She had trained a team of local technicians, but they could only handle routine maintenance. When something went wrong with the complex quantum systems, they were lost. The factory employed thousands of workers from 6 different species. If production stopped, entire communities would face unemployment. Krelvox realized that his world's prosperity had depended on human knowledge. He had taken for granted Dr. Sithencourt, the Council's new chief xenopsychologist, sat in his office, surrounded by files that might as well have been written in an alien language, which in a way they were. Dr. Emma Foster's psychological profiles filled thousands of data storage units, but reading them was like trying to understand poetry written by a genius. Foster had somehow predicted cultural conflicts before they happened, seeing patterns in behavior that escaped other observers. Her notes contained phrases like watch for increased ritual displays during economic stress, and social hierarchies will invert under these specific conditions. The predictions were accurate, but the reasoning behind them was invisible. His communication system chimed with an urgent message from the outer colonies. Two allied species were having a trade dispute that threatened to escalate into violence. In the old days, Foster would have sent a detailed analysis explaining exactly what was really bothering both sides and how to address their deeper concerns. Sithinkor stared at his own analysis, which was technically correct but completely missed the emotional undertones that drove the conflict. He could identify the surface problems, but not the hidden motivations that Foster had always uncovered. Council Chairman Vexmore called an emergency session to address what his staff politely called operational challenges. The Great Chamber felt different with the human section empty, like a musical ensemble missing an instrument that no one had realized was essential. The border conflict between the Krellians and the hegemony has escalated, reported the Security Council. Both sides are mobilizing military forces. What about mediation? Asked Council Member Quexnil of the Ethereal Collective. Our diplomatic corps is overwhelmed. We have 3 major conflicts requiring mediation, but only enough trained diplomats. For one, the humans used to handle 2/3 of our mediation requests. Vexmore's golden scales dimmed slightly. Surely we can train more mediators. The training programs were designed by humans. We have the curricula, but we don't understand their teaching methods. Human mediators learn to think like multiple species simultaneously. Our mediators tend to favor their own species' perspectives. The trade representative spoke next. Commercial shipping is experiencing significant delays. Many established trade routes are breaking down because human merchants maintain the complex timing and coordination systems. And our early warning systems? Vexmore asked, though he dreaded the answer. Captain Noah Blake's deep space monitoring network has been shut down. We're trying to re-establish coverage, but Blake had sensors in locations we've never mapped. He somehow knew where to place monitoring stations to detect problems before they became crises. The reports continued for hours. Medical research had slowed dramatically without human insights into cross-species biology. The refugee support system was failing as supply chains collapsed. Industrial worlds were struggling with equipment failures they couldn't repair. Each problem seemed small by itself, but together they painted a picture that disturbed Vexmore deeply. The humans hadn't just been members of the Council, they had been the invisible framework that held galactic civilization together. Surely these are temporary adjustments, he said finally. The galaxy functioned before humans joined the Council. Council. Member Thexrax of the Ancient Eternal Archives spoke for the first time during the session. His species were historians who remembered everything. Chairman, before human contact, galactic civilization was smaller, simpler, and far more violent. The current level of integration and cooperation is unprecedented in galactic history. It exists because humans made it possible. The chamber fell silent. Vexmore looked around at the empty human section, seeing it clearly for the first time. 300 years of contributions, innovations, and quiet solutions had walked away without drama or demands. Begin researching methods to contact the humans, he ordered. Surely they can be convinced to return if we offer better terms. But even as he spoke, Vexmore suspected that the humans hadn't left over terms or conditions. They had left because they were tired of being taken for granted. The question was whether the Council could learn to function without them, or whether they would have to swallow their pride and admit they needed humanity more than humanity needed them. The growing silence where human voices had once been was becoming deafening. 2 years had passed since humanity's departure, and the galaxy was beginning to tear itself apart. What had started as minor inconveniences had grown into major crises that threatened the stability of galactic civilization itself. The war between the Zephyrian Collective and the Molten Hegemony erupted without warning in the Outer Rim territories. Fleet Admiral Corksven of the Zephyrian forces watched his tactical display with growing confusion as reports poured in from the front lines. "How did we miss their fleet movements?" he demanded of his intelligence officer. "Sir, our deep space sensors detected nothing unusual until their attack began," the officer replied nervously. "The human early warning network would have spotted their preparations weeks ago." Corksven studied the battle reports. The molten hegemony had struck 3 mining worlds simultaneously, suggesting months of careful planning. Captain Noah Blake's monitoring stations had prevented dozens of such surprise attacks over the years, providing early intelligence that allowed conflicts to be resolved through diplomacy rather than warfare. "What about the Council mediation team?" "Sir, they're still dealing with the Krellian border crisis. The Council says they don't have enough mediators for multiple conflicts." The Zephyrian admiral made a decision that would haunt him later. "Then we respond with force. Launch the counterattack immediately." Within hours, 3 star systems were engulfed in warfare. The conflict that human mediators would have prevented with a few weeks of careful negotiations had become a shooting war that would last for years on the agricultural world of New Harvest. Dr. Ilkshen faced a crisis that made war seem simple. By comparison, the plague had started small, affecting only a few workers in the grain processing facilities. Now it was spreading across 3 species and showed no signs of stopping. "The infection rate is accelerating," reported his medical team. "We've tried all standard treatments, but nothing is working." Dr. Ilkshen stared at the genetic analysis of the pathogen. His medical knowledge was extensive, but this disease crossed species barriers in ways he didn't understand. Dr. Kevin Hayes had developed protocols for exactly this type of crisis, creating early detection systems that caught interspecies diseases before they became pandemics. "Contact the Council Medical Authority," he ordered. "Sir, we did. They're sending a specialist team, but they won't arrive for 6 days. The disease could spread to a dozen worlds by then." Hayes had maintained research stations throughout Council space, each one monitoring for signs of dangerous mutations and cross-species infections. His early warning system had prevented 17 potential pandemics over the past century. Now, that network was gone, and Dr. Y.L. Kai-Shen watched helplessly as a preventable outbreak spiraled out of control. The economic collapse was hitting everywhere. On the trading hub of Commerce Station Alpha, Merchant Guild leader Jextor stared at shipping schedules that made no sense anymore. Routes that had operated smoothly for decades were breaking down as coordination failures multiplied. "The Centauri freight convoy is 3 weeks overdue," his assistant reported. "The vegan merchants are refusing to honor their contracts because their deliveries keep arriving at the wrong times." Lieutenant Maya Rogers had coordinated shipping schedules across 47 star systems, somehow managing the complex dance of supply and demand that kept galactic trade flowing. Her replacement teams could handle individual routes, but they couldn't see the big picture that made everything work together. "What about the emergency supply runs to the refugee worlds?" "Sir, 2 convoys have been lost because they arrived during local conflicts. Without the Human Intelligence Network, we don't know which systems are safe for civilian shipping." Jextor realized that galactic commerce had depended on human merchants who served as more than just traders. They had been information brokers, conflict predictors, and logistical wizards who somehow kept goods flowing even during crises. Now trade routes were collapsing one by one. The research station Epsilon had become a monument to human genius and alien frustration. Dr. Quentak stood in Paul Martinez's former laboratory, surrounded by quantum field generators that might as well have been magical artifacts. "The calculations are all here," he said to his research team. "Martinez's equations predict revolutionary advances in faster-than-light travel." "But we don't understand the intuitive leaps," replied his assistant. He somehow saw connections between quantum mechanics and spatial geometry that our models can't reproduce. Dr. Quentak had been studying Martinez's work for 18 months. The human scientist had been on the verge of breakthrough discoveries that could transform galactic civilization. His notes were complete, his data accurate, his conclusions mathematically sound, but the creative insights that made his work brilliant were impossible to duplicate. "Perhaps if we run more simulations," suggested another team member. "We've run 10,000 simulations," Quintac replied wearily. "Martinez would have solved this problem in 6 months. We're no closer to understanding than when we started." The military situation was becoming desperate. General Vortkasov, the Council Defense Forces, watched his tactical displays with growing alarm as conflicts erupted across Council space. The Zephyrian Molten War had spread to 5 star systems. The Krellian border dispute had turned violent, and 3 minor species were fighting over resource rights in the inner colonies. "Our response times are too slow," he admitted to his staff. "By the time we deploy forces to one conflict, 2 more have started elsewhere." General Susan Porter had developed the strategic doctrines that allowed diverse alien species to function as a unified military force. Her training programs had created coordination protocols that made Council forces incredibly effective despite their biological and cultural differences. "The different species units aren't working together properly," reported his operations officer. "The Krellian heavy assault troops keep getting ahead of the ethereal support units. The Vorthic crystal beings can't coordinate with the molten hegemony fire teams." Without human strategic thinking, the Council military was fragmenting back into individual species forces that couldn't effectively support each other. General Vortkas found himself commanding not one unified army, but dozens of separate units that happened to wear the same insignia. Council Chairman Vexmore stood in his private chambers reading reports that painted a picture of galactic civilization in free fall. The carefully maintained peace that had lasted for centuries was crumbling, trade networks were collapsing, medical crises were spreading unchecked. Research had stalled across multiple fields. His aide entered with yet another crisis report. "Chairman, the agricultural worlds are requesting emergency food distribution assistance. The plague on New Harvest has contaminated their grain reserves. What about our emergency response teams?" "Sir, they're coordinating refugee evacuations from the war zones. We don't have enough resources for multiple simultaneous crises." Vexmore realized with growing horror that humanity had been far more than just another council member. They had been the civilization's immune system, preventing small problems from becoming major disasters. They had been the nervous system that allowed different parts of the galaxy to coordinate their actions. They had been the problem solvers who found solutions when everyone else saw only obstacles. "Begin immediate preparations for a galaxy-wide search for humanity," he ordered. "Use every resource at our disposal." "Sir, where should we search?" "The galaxy contains billions of star systems." Vexmore looked out at the stars through his office window. Somewhere out there, humanity was probably thriving, building something better than what they had left behind. The question was whether galactic civilization could survive long enough to find them and convince them to return. "Search everywhere," he said finally. "The galaxy is dying without them, and I suspect they know it." The irony was not lost on him. For 3 centuries, the Council had treated humanity as useful but replaceable members. Now they were discovering that humans had been the irreplaceable foundation that made galactic civilization possible. Without them, everything was falling apart. The silence where human voices had once been was now a deafening roar of crisis and conflict. And somewhere in that growing chaos, Vexmore began to understand that humanity's quiet departure had been the galaxy's loudest wake-up call. 5 years had passed since humanity's departure, and the Galactic Council finally admitted what everyone could see. Their civilization was collapsing. The war between the Zephyrians and Molten Hegemony had spread to 12 star systems. Trade had declined by 70%, and multiple species were considering withdrawal from the Council altogether. Council Chairman Vexmore stood before an emergency session of the full Council, his golden scales dulled with exhaustion and stress. The Great Chamber was only half full now, as many species had recalled their representatives to deal with local crises. "Fellow Council members," he began, his voice heavy with reluctance, "I formally authorize Operation Reconnect. We must find humanity and convince them to return." The chamber buzzed with mixed reactions. Some species saw this as necessary, others viewed it as humiliating. Council member Vex Rax of the Eternal Archives spoke first. Chairman, in 3,000 years of galactic history, no species has ever voluntarily returned after departing Council space. What makes you believe humanity will be different? Vexmore's tail swished nervously. Because we need them to be different. Without human intervention, our civilization will not survive another decade. The search operation began immediately. Captain Zorkes of the exploration vessel Deep Survey led the first search team into the regions where human colonies had once existed. His crew included specialists from 6 different species, each hoping to find some clue about humanity's destination. Approaching the former human colony of New Boston, reported his navigator. Sensors show the settlement is intact but completely abandoned. Zorkes studied the readings as they entered orbit around the pleasant agricultural world. The human settlement below looked peaceful and well-maintained, like its inhabitants had simply vanished one day. "Take us down," he ordered. The landing party walked through empty streets lined with human architecture. The buildings were clean, the power systems still functional, the gardens carefully tended by automated systems. It was like exploring a museum of human life, preserved perfectly but devoid of the people who had created it. "They left everything behind," observed Dr. Klix Venn, the team's archaeologist. "Furniture, artwork, personal belongings. This doesn't look like an evacuation, it looks like a carefully planned abandonment." Captain Zorkes entered what had been the colony administrator's office. The desk was clear except for a single data pad containing a brief message. Colony New Boston officially closed. All systems maintained for potential future use. No forwarding address. They were thorough, he muttered. And they clearly didn't intend to come back. The search teams found the same pattern everywhere. Human settlements were abandoned but intact, cleaned out but not destroyed. The humans had left behind functional infrastructure, but taken everything that might indicate where they were going. Dr. Wentor, the Council's chief xenopsychologist, studied the abandoned settlements from his office on Nexus Prime. The reports from dozens of search teams painted a consistent picture that troubled him deeply. "They didn't flee," he told his research staff. "Fleeing populations leave signs of haste, panic, or desperation. These settlements were closed down like businesses that had simply decided to relocate." His assistant, a nervous mammalian being named Pipyex, brought him another report. "Dr. Wentor, the search teams have found traces of human survey expeditions in 17 unexplored systems. But the trails are at least 6 years old." 6 years? Dr. Wentor calculated quickly. That means they were planning this departure for at least a year before they announced it. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't left in anger or frustration. They had carefully planned their exodus years in advance. This suggested a level of forethought that made their return seem increasingly unlikely. In the Council archives, researcher Kexnil made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the leadership. She had been studying human diplomatic records, looking for clues about their motivations. "I've found something," she announced to the emergency committee. Ambassador Grace Miller's private diplomatic notes contain detailed assessments of Council decision-making patterns. She displayed the files on the main screen. Page after page of careful analysis showed how human proposals were consistently modified, delayed, or attributed to alien leadership. The records documented 3 centuries. A systematic dismissal? "Look at this entry from 15 years ago," Kexnil highlighted a particular passage. Miller writes, "Proposed early warning system for pandemic detection approved in modified form, with credit assigned to Vorthik Medical Authority. Human epidemiological expertise removed from public documentation. Pattern continues unchanged. Council." Chairman Vexmore read the files with growing dismay. The humans hadn't just been keeping records, they had been documenting their marginalization in meticulous detail. Every snub, every time their credit was stolen, every instance of their warnings being ignored until disaster struck. "They knew exactly how we treated them," he said quietly. "And they kept records of everything. Dr. Ian Foster's psychological Files revealed even more uncomfortable truths. His assessments of Council species had predicted the current crisis with frightening accuracy. According to Foster's analysis, reported the research team, he calculated that without human mediation, the galaxy would fragment into competing power blocks within 8 years. We're currently in year 5, and his predictions are proving accurate. The search expanded beyond Council space, with exploration teams venturing into regions that had been considered too dangerous or remote to explore. Captain Yexmore led a deep space expedition into the galactic void between spiral arms, following faint traces of human survey beacons. We're 3 months out from Council space, he reported. Still finding occasional signs of human exploration, but nothing recent. His navigator, a crystalline vorthek named Clearsinger, studied the stellar charts. Captain, if humans were planning to establish a new civilization, they would need hundreds of suitable worlds. That would require surveying thousands of star systems. How long would that take? With their exploration technology, probably decades. They must have been planning this departure for much longer than we realized. The economic analysis painted an even grimmer picture. Trade coordinator Jexwell had been studying commercial patterns before and after humanity's departure. Human merchants weren't just traders, she explained to the Council Economic Committee. They were economic architects who designed trade relationships. That benefited everyone involved. Look at these numbers. The data showed that human-mediated trade agreements had consistently created value for all parties, while alien-negotiated deals tended to favor one species over others. Human economic thinking had somehow found ways to make everyone prosperous. Without human coordination, our trade networks are reverting to zero-sum competition, Jexwell continued. Species are fighting over resources instead of creating shared prosperity. The military search proved equally frustrating. General Korthves had deployed scout fleets in every direction, looking for signs of human military activity or colonization efforts. We found nothing, he reported to the Defense Council. No military bases, no colonial infrastructure, no signs of large-scale human presence anywhere within 50 light-years of Council space. Could they have hidden their new location somehow? It's possible, General Korthves admitted reluctantly. Human technology was always more advanced than we publicly acknowledged. If they wanted to hide a new civilization, they might have the capability to do so. Council member Zephyr Class made the observation that everyone had been avoiding. Perhaps we're searching in the wrong places. What if humanity didn't establish a new civilization in our galaxy at all? The chamber fell silent. The idea that humans might have left the galaxy entirely was too disturbing for most council members to consider. The logistics alone, protested Trade Representative Vexnin. Moving millions of humans, all their equipment, their entire civilization to another galaxy? Impossible. Impossible for us, Zephyr Class replied. But human engineering capabilities were always underestimated by this council. We assumed they were limited to the same technological constraints that bind our species. Chairman Vexmore realized that the search might be hopeless. If humanity had truly departed for destinations beyond the galaxy, no search operation could find them. The Council would have to face the possibility that their former mediators and problem solvers were gone forever. Continue the search, he ordered finally, but begin preparing contingency plans for permanent human absence. The words tasted bitter in his mouth. After 5 years of crisis and collapse, the Council was finally admitting that they needed humanity. More than humanity had ever needed them. The question was whether this realization had come too late to matter. 10 years had passed since humanity's silent departure, and the Galactic Council was dying. Half the member species had withdrawn to protect their own worlds. Trade networks had collapsed entirely, and several regions of space were now controlled by warlords who ignored Council authority completely. Council Chairman Vexmore stood in the great chamber that had once housed representatives from 47 species. Now only 16 species maintained delegations, and those were mostly symbolic. The empty human section seemed to mock him every time he looked at it. Chairman, his aide approached nervously, the final search teams have returned. No trace of human presence anywhere within 200 light-years of Council space, Vexmore nodded wearily. He had expected this news, but it still felt like a physical blow. 10 years of searching, thousands of ships deployed, entire fleets dedicated to finding humanity, and they had discovered nothing but empty space and abandoned settlements. Prepare the emergency transmission array, he ordered. It's time for our final attempt. The most powerful communication system in Council space came online, broadcasting on every frequency that human technology had ever used. Vexmore stood before the transmitter, knowing this might be his last chance to reach the species that had once held galactic civilization together. To humanity, wherever you may be, he began, his voice carrying across space toward destinations he could only imagine. I am Vexmore, chairman of what remains of the Galactic Council. We have searched for you for 10 years, and we have found only silence. He paused, struggling with words he had never thought he would need to say. We were wrong. We failed to appreciate your contributions. We took credit for your work, ignored your warnings, and dismissed your importance. The galaxy is collapsing without you, and we formally request your return to help us rebuild what we have destroyed. The transmission went out on a broad beam toward every region of space where humans might have gone. Then Vexmore waited, hoping for a response that might never come. The answer arrived 3 days later, but not from humanity. Instead, a fleet of ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Council space. The vessels were unfamiliar designs, sleek and advanced, bearing no identification signals that Council sensors could recognize. Unknown fleet, this is Nexus Prime. Control, transmitted the Spaceport Authority. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. The response came in perfect Council standard, but the voice was clearly human. This is Captain Tony Brooks of the Wanderer Fleet. We represent several species from the galactic frontier. Regions, we received your transmission and have come to respond on humanity's behalf. Council Chairman Vexmore rushed to the spaceport as the lead ship requested permission to dock. A human walking onto Nexus Prime after 10 years felt like seeing a ghost return to life. Captain Brooks was a middle-aged man with gray hair and calm eyes that seemed to see everything. Behind him walked representatives from species that Vexmore didn't recognize, beings who looked different from any Council races. Chairman Vexmore, Brooks said with polite formality. Thank you for receiving us. We have a message from the United Terran Federation. They met in the same chamber where Ambassador Jake Morrison had announced humanity's departure a decade earlier. Brooks looked around the nearly empty room with what might have been sadness. 10 years ago you asked why humanity was leaving, Brooks began. Today I can give you a complete answer. He activated a holographic display that showed star charts extending far beyond Council space. Humanity didn't flee to some distant corner of this galaxy, Chairman. We established the Terran Federation in the local group of galaxies, working with species that the Council had dismissed as primitive or unworthy of contact. The display showed thriving colonies, massive space stations, and trade networks spanning multiple galaxies. Vexmore stared in shock at the scope of human achievement in just 10 years. How is this possible? He whispered. Dr. Michelle Turner, who had joined Brooks for this meeting, stepped forward. Because we partnered with civilizations that valued cooperation over hierarchy, Chairman. Species that saw humanity as equals rather than useful subordinates. She gestured to her alien companions. The kindred from the Magellanic Clouds, the Unity from Andromeda, the collective from galaxies your telescopes haven't even cataloged yet. They welcomed human knowledge and offered their own in return. Brooks continued the explanation. We didn't leave in anger, Chairman. We left because we realized that the Council would never change while humanity remained to solve their problems. You needed to learn what the galaxy looked like without us. And what does it look like? Vexmore asked, though he already knew the answer. Exactly what Dr. Ian Foster predicted in his reports that you never read, Brooks replied. Fragmentation, conflict, economic collapse, and the breakdown of interspecies cooperation. He calculated that the Council would dissolve within 10 years of human departure. His timeline was remarkably accurate. The revelation hit Vexmore like a physical blow. You knew this would happen. You could have prevented it. No, Dr. Turner said firmly. We could have delayed it the same way we had been delaying it for 3 centuries. But the underlying problems would have remained unchanged. The Council needed to face the consequences of taking humanity for granted. Brooks activated another display showing the current state of Council space. The galaxy is dying, Chairman, because the Council never learned to function as equals. You created a hierarchy where human contributions were essential but invisible, valued but never acknowledged. Some of our member species have applied to join the Terran Federation, Dr. Turner added. The application process requires demonstrating genuine commitment to cooperation and mutual respect. It's surprisingly difficult for species that are used to thinking in terms of dominance hierarchies. Vexmore found his voice again. What would it take for humanity to return and help us rebuild? Brooks and Turner exchanged glances. Chairman, humanity won't be returning to Council space. We've moved beyond the need for the Council's approval or recognition. We're building something better with partners who truly understand the value of cooperation. But surely some form of cooperation is possible, Vexmore pleaded. Trade agreements, cultural exchanges, anything. Individual Council species are welcome to apply for Federation membership, Brooks said. But the application process takes years and requires fundamental changes in how applicants approach interspecies relations. Most Council species aren't ready for that level of equality. Dr. Turner softened slightly. Chairman, we don't hate the Council. We're disappointed but not angry. You gave us the chance to find better partners and build a better civilization. In a way, we should thank you. The meeting concluded with Brooks delivering humanity's final message to the Council. The United Terran Federation wishes the Galactic Council success in whatever form it takes in the future. We hope you learn to value the contributions of all your members before it's too late. As the Wanderer fleet departed, Vexmore stood in his office watching the ships disappear into faster-than-light travel. They were heading back to a civilization that humanity had built without Council approval, beyond Council reach and apparently far beyond Council capability to match. Over the following months, the Galactic Council formally dissolved. Some species attempted to maintain the old structure, but without the foundation that humanity had provided, it quickly collapsed into competing factions and territorial disputes. Several species did eventually apply for Federation membership. The process was indeed lengthy and required fundamental changes in their approach to cooperation. Most failed the initial evaluations. Unable to abandon hierarchical thinking in favor of true partnership, Vexmore spent his final years writing memoirs that served as a warning to future civilizations about the dangers of taking valuable allies for granted. His writings became required reading in Federation schools, used as an example of how not to treat partners and equals. The last entry in his journal was simple. We had 300 years to learn the value of cooperation, and we wasted every day of that gift. Humanity tried to teach us, but we were too proud to listen. By the time we understood what we had lost, they had found something better than what we could offer. Far beyond the dying remnants of Council space, the colony ship UES New Dawn approached. A pristine star system in the Andromeda Galaxy. Captain Rachel Stone stood on the bridge, watching new worlds appear on her sensors. Worlds where humanity and its partners would build something unprecedented in galactic history, she thought briefly. About the Council they had left behind, hoping that other species might learn from the Council's mistakes. But her attention quickly returned to the future, to the civilization that valued cooperation over control, partnership over hierarchy, and genuine equality over the illusion of unity. Behind them, the Milky Way galaxy continued its ancient rotation, carrying the lessons of the Council's failure toward whatever species might one day have the wisdom to learn from them.